Ladies and gentlemen in the Republic of Korea and the United States, welcome to our webinar about the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command, which you will frequently hear referred to as CFC, on the occasion of its founding on November 7th, 1978. The Korea Defense Veterans Association and the Korea-U.S. Alliance Foundation are very proud to partner to present this webinar. I am Colonel Retired Steve Lee, the Senior Vice President of KDVA. The sequence of events will be opening remarks from the CFC Commander, General Abrams. Then our moderators, Dr. Stephen Noerper and Dr. Ashton Cho, after a brief introduction, will open a moderated discussion with our three panelists. The moderator will open the floor for Q&A with our audience members. You can write questions in English or Korean at any time using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can do this even before the Q&A session starts. Please keep the questions short and relevant to our discussion and address your questions to a panelist. This webinar will be available on the kdva.vet digital library and the KDVA YouTube channel later today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce our moderators who will take over after the message from General Abrams. Professor Stephen Noerper teaches Northeast Asia and Korean Peninsula Relations at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. He is a Korea Society Senior Director for Policy, Research Scholar, Senior Research Scholar at Columbia University's Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and a Senior Advisor to the United Nations Program in support of cooperation in Northeast Asia. The author of more than 70 publications on U.S. policy, Korea, and Northeast Asia, Stephen has appeared widely on radio and television to include the BBC, Bloomberg, CBC, CNN, NPR, VOA, and the Wall Street Journal, and other print. Serving as co-moderator is Dr. Ashton Cho, who is the Vice President and Director of International Security Cooperation at the Korea Association of Military Studies. Ashton received his PhD from Columbia and was previously the Shorenstein Postgraduate Fellow at Stanford University's Asia Pacific Research Center and an Advanced Research Scholar at Peking University School of International Studies. Ashton's current research activities focus on the ROK-U.S. Alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have opening remarks from the current commander of the United Nations Command, ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command, and U.S. Forces Korea, General Robert Abrams. Sir.
Okay, Steve, good morning. How do you hear me?
Great, sir. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning from Yongsan Base and the White House, the headquarters of the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command. Good evening to all those on the East Coast and everywhere in between. Thanks for the opportunity to provide some opening comments. I've been in command now 2 years. I'm in my 39th year of service, and I'll start by telling everybody it is the honor of my career to serve here as the Commander of United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, and U.S. Forces Korea. I wake up every day with, really, it's pretty simple. I've got two things on my mind every morning. The first one is, how am I going to strengthen the ROK-U.S. alliance? And then the second one is what do I got to do today to ensure that we are maintaining a strong combined defense posture and that we are ready to fight tonight? That's what I wake up and think about every single day. I want to make 3 quick points as part of my opening comments. The first one is, as Steve mentioned, Combined Forces Command was established on November 7th, 1978. This year, we just celebrated our 42nd anniversary. What I'd highlight for everybody, just to be crystal clear, since there continues to be questions about it, when we created Combined Forces Command, United Nations Command relinquished its operational warfighting mission and turned it over to Combined Forces Command. United Nations Command is not a warfighting headquarters, nor is there any intent or plan for UNC to reassert itself as an operational headquarters. Key to the activation of Combined Forces Command is a simple principle. Combined Forces Command is a separate military entity that receives its policy, guidance, direction, and missions from our binational military committee underneath both the Secretary of Defense, the Minister of National Defense, and the two National Command Authorities. Combined Forces Command is the operational warfighting headquarters for the Korea Theater of Operations, and the combined components are tactically integrated through continuous combined joint planning, training, and exercises. In armistice, in peacetime like we are today, CFC is just a standing headquarters without any forces. But we have to practice and train as if we're going to find ourselves in hostilities and be prepared to receive those forces. Because in wartime, CFC can expect to have operational control of over 600,000 active duty military personnel of all services from both countries, and likely with wartime augmentation and mobilization, both here in Korea and the United States, that may be another 3 million reservists. So that's why it's fundamental for us to continue our robust training program. As one of my predecessors coined, we believe and tell everyone and live this every day that Combined Forces Command is the heartbeat of the ROK-U.S. alliance, because it's the day-to-day representation of our mutual commitment to the combined defense of the Republic of Korea. And CFC's purpose is to be a clear deterrent to any North Korean provocative behavior or potential misunderstandings, miscalculations, and to prevent the restart of hostilities. And as evidenced by, we've gone 67 years without restarting of the hostilities. I'd say that CFC has certainly carried on the mandate that its predecessor, UNC, was capable of doing from 53 to 1978. Lastly, let me just touch briefly on COVID-19 as it relates to Combined Forces Command. This past with the pandemic, we created some new and innovative combined leader development programs, crisis management staff training, revamped our rehearsals, and then all of that led to a combined command post training exercise that we conducted in August. And my message, although it started to increase, but back in August, many militaries around the world did not have the capacity to train during the pandemic. Not so for the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command and our combined components. So you got to think about it, thousands, literally thousands of service members, both ROK and U.S., operated in close proximity for over 3 weeks in our wartime command posts in very close proximity, and resulted in 0 positive infections. And how is that possible? Well, first, we're a very disciplined outfit, and we've got very disciplined service members. Secondly, like all really good military units, it's about trust, mutual trust. And we trusted each other that we would follow our health protection measures to ensure that the force remains safe and healthy and COVID-free. And it's really the ultimate expression of the strength of the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command and our combined components that we were able to pull this off because of that commitment to each other. We continue to maintain our number one priority continues to be to protect the force, to protect our mission. And to date, our positive rate has been extraordinarily low. We have not had one positive case in Combined Forces Command. And the positive rate inside the ROK Armed Forces is very low, and equally low in U.S. Forces Korea, with a total of 3 service members testing positive since the beginning of the pandemic, which is fairly remarkable. So that's probably more than you wanted, but thanks for the opportunity, Steve and KDVA, to address this august audience this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, General Abrams, and thank you, Steve Lee. And thank you to the Korea Defense Veterans Association and the Korea-U.S. Alliance Foundation. They are bringing together for you today top military and policy thought leaders on the CFC as we mark its anniversary. The CFC plays a central role in the security and stability of Korea in terms of crisis management, in terms of countering the threat from North Korea, in terms of underscoring the alliance commitment between the United States and Republic of Korea. Today, we'll cover that alliance. We'll consider that threat. We'll go behind the scenes with the CFC team working together. We'll examine issues of Opcon transfer, and we'll look at where CFC might be in 2 to 4 years. And now for introductions, Dr. Ashton Cho.
Thank you, Steve. And I would like to thank the KDVA and CUSAF for inviting me to this wonderful group of speakers. I couldn't help but agree with you more, Steve, that we do have the best ROK-U.S. military and thought leaders here with us today to discuss very timely and important yet very overlooked issue of the CFC. And it's an honor being here with us today, General Vincent Brooks, who is the chairman and president of the Korea Defense Veterans Association. He's also a principal with West Exec Advisors and is on the board of directors of 3 public companies and 1 other non-profit organization. He's also a visiting senior fellow at the Harvard University Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, a distinguished fellow at the University of Texas with both the Clements Center for National Security and also the Strauss Center for International Security and Law. Finally, he is also an executive fellow with the Institute for Defense and Business. And here, connecting in with me from Seoul is General Leem Ho-young. General Leem is a vice chairman of the Korea Defense Veterans Association and vice president of the Korea-U.S. Alliance Foundation. He was the commander of the Ground Component Command and deputy commander of the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command from 2016 to 2017. General Leem has served in several crucial and diverse positions in the ROK military, such as the ROK Army's Director of Audit Inspection, the Director of Strategy and Planning at the ROK JCS, and he has been a lifelong infantry officer since his graduation from the Korea Military Academy, class number 38. He's currently also the president of the Korea Association of Military Studies, a think tank committed to advancing military and security studies and policy in Korea. And this operates under the auspices of the ROK Ministry of National Defense as a nonprofit organization. And last but not least, it is a great pleasure to have one of the foremost leading experts in the field of East Asia security, South Korea and North Korea, Mr. Bruce Klingner here is with us. He is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Klingner's analysis and writing about North Korea, South Korea, Japan, and East Asia is informed by his 20 years of service at the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mr. Klingner, who joined Heritage in 2007, has testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. As many of you know, he is a frequent commentator in US and foreign media. His articles and commentary have appeared in major American and foreign publications, and he is a regular guest on broadcast and cable news outlets. Thank you for being here. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Ashton. We will begin our discussion now, and we'd like to begin with the first question of how has CFC evolved to support the alliance and defend against the North Korean threat. Let us begin with General Leem.
제 목소리가 잘 들리시나요?
Do you hear me well?
Yes, sir.
브룩스 사령관님은 뭐 저하고 같이 근무하면서
General Brooks worked with me, and he's my big brother, and Stephen and other moderators, and Colonel Steve Lee. All those people I've known for a long time. I'm really happy to see you all again. By commemorating the anniversary of the CFC, it actually came to make think considerably about how CFC has defended the Republic of Korea from the North Korea's threat, and what kind of important role has CFC has played up until now. So 1953, July 27, war ended. And since then, the war did not reoccur again. It was because the CFC and the UNC existed and is located in South Korea. That's my opinion. So CFC, if we look at the progress, so July 7th of 1973, 78 CFC was founded. We have to think about the situation of that time. 1978 was the time that President Nixon announced the Nixon Doctrine, and the Vietnam War was the big issue. And under the Nixon Doctrine, President Nixon says that the U.S. has to put more responsibility of things happening in Asia into Asian government. So in 1971, the 7th Army withdrew from South Korea, and at the 30th UN General Assembly, there was a saying that UNC should be dismantled, and the agreement was passed. So the discussion about withdrawing UNC or dismantling UNC was underway at that time. Another thing we have to remember is that 1976, I don't know if everybody remembers it, there was a massacre of acts at the DMZ area. So that was the moment that we were very close to the occurrence of the war. So DEFCON 2 was issued. So by facing the situation that we may start the war, so we thought about the UNC's existence. So the UNC at that time, the UNC at that time, according to the US and the ROK, was not a proper organization to initiate the war. So, and the president also said that the CFC needed to be, the US Army needed to be withdrawn from the South Korea at that time. So CFC's role became very important. And that way, the Opcon, the wartime Opcon was handed into the CFC. After that, the Korean political situation and other issues, political issues happened. And in 1994, the peacetime Opcon was handed into South Korea. And from 1994, the CFC only maintains the wartime Opcon. And in 2000, from the 2000, because of the North Korea's threat of missiles and nuclear weapons, escalated, and the CFC, in addition to the conventional tactical army or the capability, also needed to have a more modernized capability. So the Patriot and the SAD was located in South Korea, and the CFC needed to grow the power to manage those SAD and Patriot system. And in 2002, a lot of serious situation happened. Cheonan arm attack and Yeonpyeong-do attack happened in 2000, in the beginning of the 2000. So in South Korea, there was a saying, not only in wartime, but also the peacetime, we have to prepare for the possible threat from North Korea. So in 2013, the ROK-U.S. Joint Development Plan was established so that we can prepare for the North Korean threat. So when the threat happens, even during the peacetime, the CFC, both countries can respond to the situation. So CFC, since it was established in 1974, 78, has been evolved this way. So in the future, based on the issue of the Opcon transition, the CFC is also facing a lot of issues. But I believe that this topic is going to be a good topic that we can think about to make CFC much better a command in the future. So CFC up until now has deterred various threats from North Korea, has played a pivotal role. So what I can say is that CFC role up until now is the heart of the ROK-U.S. alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, General Leem. Bruce Klingner.
First of all, I'd like to thank KDVA for the opportunity to be here. Although I must say it's a bit intimidating talking about Combined Forces Command with the current and former commander and the former deputy commander. So as the only panelist without 4 stars on my shoulder, I feel a bit like it's Thanksgiving and I've been asked to move from the kiddie table up to the big table. And everyone sort of turns and is like, well, since you're here, say something brilliant. So let me give it a shot at least to earn my keep here. In seeing how CFC has evolved, I like to focus on just sort of one part, and that's the very significant improvement in the South Korean military in recent years. South Korea has spent a lot on their military, and to some people, they'd be surprised more under a progressive government than under conservative governments. And Seoul appears to be procuring all the right equipment. So in the past, when I interacted with US military officers and officials and experts, there were a lot of criticism of South Korean military and lots of recommendations on various weapons or other systems that South Korea should procure. But in the intervening years, Seoul has largely fulfilled all those or most of those recommendations that people gave me. They've really done across the board improvements in all the services. So now when I talk to experts and officials, the areas of concerns are now down to 2. It's insufficient C4ISR across the Korean services, as well as with the US down to tactical levels, and a inability or constrained ability to conduct joint and combined operations. So the lack of the first impedes the ability to do the second, as well as it to push tasking to US forces or to UN sending forces once Opcon transition occurs. And that would be a critical requirement to fulfill. So US officials privately comment that the South Korean military still lacks the necessary C4ISR and the capability to overcome stovepipe command structure to really enable Opcon transition right now. So, to be sure, South Korea has devoted considerable resources and attention to improving those areas. But while the capabilities have improved, it's been at a slower pace than the US would want. And the gap between the US and South Korea may actually be expanding, particularly as both the US Army and the US Marine Corps are implementing new multi-domain strategies and operations and procurement plans. So, but overall, a vast improvement in South Korean military in recent years. So I think Seoul's to be commended for that, successive administration. So that has enabled CFC overall to be a much better fighting force and a much better deterrence against North Korea.
Thank you, Bruce. General Brooks.
Well, good morning in Korea. 안녕하십니까, and good afternoon, good evening to those who are watching from the United States. First, let me say thanks to General Abrams, our current commander, for his leadership and for his remarks as well. And then frankly, thanks for the comments about how you and the command have been attacking the COVID virus. Absolutely remarkable, but a very good example, as you said, of the nature of the ROK-U.S. alliance. So I'm just grateful that we had you to provide remarks today, and thanks so much for taking the time to do that in the midst of a very busy schedule. I also want to thank KDVA. I'm the chairman and president of it, but nevertheless, there's good effort that's been done to create this webinar and several others like it. And I hope that those of you who have tuned in will continue to tune in to our various webinars, and we'll talk some more about that as we come to the end. And of course, it's a great honor to be discussing with Dr. Steve Noerper and Dr. Ashton, both great scholars whom I've come to know and admire very, very well. And to be on a panel with my former deputy commander, my Pusaring Ngwan, General Im Ho Young, who is also my younger brother. We are brothers for sure, based on the experiences we had together, trying to lead this combined force in the midst of a very difficult time in 2016 and 17 while we were together. And of course, Bruce Klingner, who is a tremendous expert. Bruce, we're the ones who are joining the big table with you. So thanks for your presence and your observations and your astute focus on the Korean Peninsula. Some great points have already been made about the progression of the Combined Forces Command that we now celebrate the 42nd birthday of just a few days ago. And let me just add a few thoughts and observations. I think one of the points that needs to be made is how the subordinate structure of the combined force has emerged. Now, we've talked about the headquarters in many ways being established in 1978, initially having the operational control of Korean and American forces in armistice and in war. That was the original structure in 1978, essentially taking those roles away from UN command, as General Abrams highlighted to us. But by 1994, that changed. And with the growing capabilities of the South Korean military, and candidly, a desire for greater sovereign authority over the defense of Korea in armistice, the control of Korean forces and US forces was released in armistice in 1994. And that Korean authority passed to the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Republic of Korea. So it's very important to recognize the South Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff as an operating body from that time on, and that continues into this day. It's the South Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff who control the defense of Korea on a day-to-day basis in armistice. Now, beneath the headquarters level, what we've seen is a migration away from an Army-centric approach to warfighting to a joint-centric approach. In other words, not just the Army being focused on between the United States and South Korea, but rather organizing not into Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine elements, but into combined component commands. So a combined ground component command that has all ground forces from the United States and from the Republic of Korea. A combined air component command that has air forces from the United States and South Korea. A combined special operations component command, a combined naval forces command, a combined marine component command. These are the structures that are subordinate to the combined force headquarters. And that combination of combined components, subordinate headquarters, to the parent headquarters, the ROK-U.S. CFC, Combined Forces Command, is extraordinarily unique around the world. You'll see that configuration from time to time in the opening of combat operations, as was the case in Afghanistan in 2001. But a standing organization like that, this one is unique. It's the only one in the world. So that migration is very important. I think it's important to recognize also that the migration has, in many cases, been driven by political decisions about the force levels on the Korean Peninsula. That's what drove some of the genesis of the Combined Forces Command in 1978, particularly after the axe murder incident of 1976 in Panmunjom. There were decisions about reducing the US force presence and increasing the burden of defense onto South Korea. That was the basis for discussions again in 1971 to 1992, during which time a combined field army was created as a standing headquarters to coordinate the war plans between the ground forces of the Republic of Korea and the United States. It was a combined army at that point in time. But what was driving it was a reduction of US forces, as you heard, a reduction of the US 7th Infantry Division as one illustration of that. Eventually, that combined field army was disestablished in 1992 in a discussion about reducing forces yet again and passing greater authority to South Korea. South Korea was yearning for it, and the United States was yearning for it as well. So we see that there's a pattern of pressure politically to change the configuration of forces on the Korean Peninsula that have driven much of the evolution of the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command. I would submit to you that's still somewhat the case as both countries look at what their postures should be and what the burden should be between the two. And even as we think about perhaps a successful progression to a condition of peace on the Korean Peninsula. All of this was thought through in the early 2000s, and particularly coming into a design in 2009, a mutual agreement between President Obama from the United States and President Im Young-bak from the Republic of Korea. And there had been a decision that the wartime control of forces would transfer also to a South Korean lead under the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that would occur by 2012. North Korea has a habit of intervening in this decision-making process of the alliance. And the shelling of Yeonpyeong Island in 2010, as well as the horrific sinking of the Cheonan, changed the dynamics in 2010. General Leem has talked about the decision-making processes that came thereafter in 2013, but it changed the basis upon which this transformation was to occur. And so by 2012, the conditions no longer matched what had been anticipated in 2009. And a delay in that transfer was put into place with a timeline associated with 2015. The box mine incident that happened in the summer of 2015 changed that dynamic yet again, as North Korea planted mines on the South Korean side of the demilitarized zone, right along the fence, that traumatically amputated the legs of two great soldiers from the Republic of Korea. And so all these things are dynamics that impact the shape of the Combined Forces Command. Now we face a new condition where we're not going to separate into the JCS and a Korea command, but rather into one remaining Combined Forces Command, where unity of command is preserved under a South Korean commander, but under the same structure of binational authority and decision-making that General Abrams talked about. And this is the current state of play on a long journey that has begun since 1978. Let me just finally make the last point as we think about the birthday of Combined Forces Command. We can't help but think about the first two leaders, American and South Korean, both now deceased. But General Jack Vesey, who was the American commander at the time, really reset the table on how the relationship operates. And it was for him that we named the new headquarters in Pyeongtaek. And General Lee Byung-hyun, who was the first South Korean deputy commander of the ROK-U.S. Combined Forces Command in 1978. And may he rest in peace, as he passed away just this past May. So we certainly think about him and his family and his many contributions, even up to the age of 97. So with that, I'll stop and let's get into some more questions and discussion.
Thank you, sir. This was certainly very comprehensive and deep insights into the evolution of the CFC. I think we'll all be quite curious to hear how the CFC actually works behind the scenes. So how the CFC leaders and staff work together to solve issues, and especially when it comes to crises. And if I could perhaps ask have these questions asked to General Leem Ho-young first, and then General Brooks, if you could answer afterwards, that would be great. So General Leem Ho-young, please.
예. 이야기를 시간에 맞춰서 짧게 하라는 그런
I
우리
was told that I need to make my remark rather short, so I will just talk about the main point.
연합선은 창설할 때부터
From the foundation of a CFC,
장교들이 동수로 똑같은 그러한
so the number of soldiers were the same for the Korean military and US military. And during the peacetime, they have different military purpose and strategy, and because of the culture, those things are different. So we had to have people who can understand both cultures and strategies and approaches, and so that we have this combined exercise, and we would have this type of exercise, although it's a little bit different now. We used to have a spring and fall, but we had more number of combined exercise. So through this combined exercise, we raised our capabilities. But during the crisis, then the officers would have pre-designated strategies and operations so that they will be following those, especially CFC is because the same number of officers work for from the US and Korea side. So if there's a crisis, we are always having meetings with the CFC and JFC. It's not easy to have that meeting all the time. So Korean officers, they work with the upper organizations, Blue House or the MND, and then they relay the messages to the US officers so that they exchange information and ideas. So they come up with the best optimal method. And in order to do that, so both countries will have to work and they have to have a mutual understanding. But the plan and the strategy is the CFC. So then all these things will be reported to the commanders, and the commanders will work with the Korean government and the Blue House, and they come up with the best possible plan so that during the crisis, they will fulfill their responsibilities. My explanation was fairly short. So if you have any questions or if you want me to elaborate on something, please let me know.
Thank you, sir. And if we can pass on to comments from General Brooks, sir. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Adding on to General Leem Ho-young's points, you know, the connection between the two governments militarily is there in the CFC headquarters. It's the commander and the deputy commander of the CFC. That is the point of connection between the two militarily. And while the US commander has two other hats as United Nations commander and US Forces commander, the scope of the thinking of that commander is different. So the UN commander is thinking about armistice and about the contributions of the international community under the UN auspices in support of Combined Forces Command. And as the US Forces commander, the commander is thinking about the US interests and US forces specifically and how they interact, and can represent both of those roles to the leadership of the Republic of Korea. But when it comes to planning for war, that is war plans, exercising to create actual readiness to conduct war, when it comes to day-to-day operations, to oversee and be aware of the status of every force on the Korean Peninsula, no matter whose control they are under. And when it comes to having standing procedures to rapidly transition from the conditions of armistice into crisis and possibly into war, we're talking the Combined Forces Command. So that's what's happening behind the scenes. It's a machine that's running all the time. And while it does not have troops committed underneath of it, it has the headquarters structure and the subordinate headquarters identified so that very quickly a decision can be made to break glass, if you will, and put these forces together. I use the metaphor of epoxy. It has a hardener and a resin that are kept separate. But when you want to mix something that's going to create a strong bond, you release them to join with one another. It's just like that with the Combined Forces Command. So having the ability and the plans and the control mechanisms to be able to take American resin and South Korean hardener and join them together in a time of crisis to create a strong bond against the enemy forces. That's what the Combined Forces Command is doing every day. My last point will be this, that there was never a time that I was considering some complex circumstance facing us in Korea that I didn't turn to my deputy commander and ask him, what do you think and what does South Korea think? And sometimes the advice would be provided immediately. In other cases, it would be, I'm going to go ask. And each one of us would have our initial discussions about what we thought was necessary and what the combined advice would be to our national leaders. And then we would follow the line of the authorities to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in both countries, to the Minister of Defense and Secretary of Defense, and sometimes into the national security councils of each country, and in some cases, even to the president, as we had some crises that were warranting decisions by presidents. And we would then get the guidance that would come back and we would join together again and put together what it is we had just heard from the two countries, and then form a course of action on how we would go forward. So this is a very important mechanism and very unique in how it operates.
Thank you, General Brooks. Bruce Klingner, you mentioned the issue of Opcon transfer. So let's begin with you and look at how you feel the transition process and the prospects for Opcon transfer will play out.
Well, I think I want to make 3 points about Opcon transition. The first, to emphasize the obvious, it's a conditions-based, not a timeline-based transfer. So it's an end state, not an end date. And Washington and Seoul agreed on 3 major conditions for Opcon transfer as prerequisites: that the ROK armed forces must have the requisite military and command means to be able to lead combined forces, that they have sufficiently developed indigenous missile defense and preemptive attack capabilities against the North Korean nuclear and missile arsenals. The security environment must have improved due to either complete or significant North Korean denuclearization, and none of those conditions have been fulfilled. So therefore, we can't do a conditions-based Opcon transition. The second point is that to ensure completion and certification of Opcon transition, it's necessary to have large-scale military exercises with South Korea in the commanding role to test the system. And but however, in the last 2 years, the Allies have canceled or constrained significant number of military exercises, first due to President Trump's announcement after the Singapore summit that we're going to cancel exercises, and then more recently due to COVID restrictions. So the post-Opcon transfer system has not really been fully tested yet. To do so, you actually have to increase the pace and the scope of the military exercises from what we've had in the last 2 years. But some in the Moon administration would want to continue to curtail military exercises as a way of trying to improve relations with North Korea. And third, and most importantly for the US side, something that I don't think gets a lot of attention now, but I think will become much more visible as we get closer to actual transition, would be address the possible congressional and public concerns about putting American troops under foreign control, what's often called the Pershing Rule. So regardless of who the CFC commander is, he remains subordinate to the national command authority of both countries, as General Abrams said. So just as General Brooks couldn't have been a rogue commander during wartime, nor could a ROK commander of CFC be that after Opcon transfer. A CFC commander, whoever it is or whatever nationality, has bosses in both countries. And a very important point is the difference between control and command. So although US and ROK forces would be under the operational control of the CFC commander, both remain under the command of their respective presidents. So it may seem like a minor difference, but it's actually very, very significant, since the presidents of both countries always retain command of their forces, even if they're placed under the control of another country. Presidential Decision Directive 25, which was signed in 1994, really delineates or articulates the difference between command and control. So what that document says is the US president retains and will never relinquish command authority over US forces. However, as commander-in-chief, the president has the authority to place US forces under the operational control of a foreign commander. And what that describes is that command is the authority to issue orders covering every aspect of military operations and administration. The chain of command from the president to the lowest US commander in the field remains inviolate. Operational control, on the other hand, is a subset of command. It's given for a specific time frame or a specific mission and includes the authority to assign tasks to US forces that are already deployed by the president and assign tasks to US units led by US officers. However, the foreign commander can't change the mission, can't deploy US forces outside of the area of responsibility that were agreed to by the president, and it can't do a number of other things. And as the PDD points out, US forces have been placed under operational control of foreign commanders since the Revolutionary War, including in World War I, and World War II, Operation Desert Storm, as well as other NATO operations. So in all cases, the US commanders maintained the capability to report separately to US military authorities, and the US reserved the right to terminate participation at any time and to take whatever action it deemed necessary to protect US forces if they were endangered. So I think of it as sort of a kick-out clause in a contract. So I can lend someone a car, but I can put restrictions on that. And if they break those restrictions, then I can take the car back. So that's the way I see operational command and control.
Thank you. General Leem, your thoughts on the transition?
이 전시작전 통제권의 전환에 관계되는 문제는 지금
Wartime Opcon transition is the most hot issue in both countries. I think, but two countries have different understandings. So I will talk about the history behind it and misunderstanding, especially in South Korea. I will mention about that. As you all are aware, July 14 of 1950, the Korean War started. It is 10 days after the Korean War. So UN forces came to South Korea, and President Lee Seung-man gave the operational control to General MacArthur. Since then, South Korean's operational control was in the hand of the US. As you have already mentioned, at that time, it was Operation Commanding Authority. Operation Commanding Authority was handed in. And as I mentioned before, the CFC was created in 1978. So Operation Commanding Authority was changed into Operation Command and was handed into the CFC. In 1994, the peacetime Opcon was handed into the ROK forces, and the CFC only came to maintain the wartime Opcon. That is the history. So what we are talking about is whether or not we'll transfer this wartime Opcon to ROK forces. So what that means is that in the future, the CFC commander will be the ROK 4-star, and the ROK 4-star will control and command the Korean forces. But many people in South Korea and General Republic, they thought that the wartime Opcon is not in ROK, but in the US, so the ROK forces can control and command the operation during the wartime. But if we look at it more closely, the military, administrative, and logistic, and unit relocation, everything, we received it. So the only thing that is left is that wartime Opcon, because during the wartime, we have to have a combined or a joint operation. And during the wartime, who's gonna control and command that authority? So it is the same as that like a UNC's perspective that in the case of the crisis, like 28 European forces will come together and like work together in South Korea. So for now, it is understood that wartime Opcon needs to be handed in because it doesn't have it now. But what is more important is that when South Korea and US have the joint operation, who's gonna control and command authority during the wartime? I think that is the misunderstanding of the South Korean public. I think we have to understand that. Thank you.
General. And we can move to our final moderated question, which is about the future of the CFC. Where do you see CFC headed in the next 2 to 4 years? What might be the main challenges and opportunities? And if perhaps we can start with General Brooks, sir, and then move on to General Leem, and then Mr. Bruce Klingner afterwards. So General Brooks, sir, please.
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Cho. And I think the answers to the last questions were excellent by Bruce Klingner and Im Ho-young. Very insightful. So I think the way we're going now is first that the spirit of combinedness will carry forward into the future. And that as we get closer to the conditions for the transfer of operational control of forces in wartime being met, as Bruce and General Leem laid out, that preservation of combinedness will be a must. And I believe that spirit will still be there. There will be discussions about the role of United Nations Command and the force levels of US Forces Korea and whether that signals a change or a potential reduction. I believe that those are separate conversations that are not related to the transfer of operational control of forces in wartime. The issue of sovereignty, I think, will resolve itself as people begin to look more deeply into this and realize that the sovereignty has already been granted. It's the day-to-day conditions under armistice. Now, compliance with the armistice certainly is impacted by UN command, but the control of forces and the command of forces on a day-to-day basis is in the hands of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Minister of Defense. So I think that realization will come out, and it should become less of a political issue than it is right now. The actual composition of the force, I think, will evolve. I'm certainly of the view that the lower levels of the command should become increasingly combined and ideally stand in a combined fashion on a day-to-day basis. But those things will be determined by the commanders in position at the time and the minister secretaries at the time through the security consultation meeting. And so I think continued progress is what we're going to see over the next several years related toward the conditions, and ideally success in deterring North Korea from a resumption of war. That's its primary mission, and that has to be the case until such time as there is peace on the Korean Peninsula. And then new discussions can begin, but that's not within 2 years, I don't believe. So thanks again.
Thank you, sir. And General Lim Ho-young, please, could you share us your comments and thoughts? Thank you.
앞으로 한 2년에서 4년 이후의 연합사의 모습은
The futures of CFC 2 to 4 years later is very closely related to the wartime Opcon transition. First, during the wartime, the operation control, who's going to do that in the CFC? We have to think about that. And the second is that the two countries' national or political situation is very important factor to think about. In South Korea, with when the Moon Jae-in administration began, there was a misunderstanding about the wartime Opcon. So there were saying that the wartime Opcon was related to the sovereignty of South Korea. So Moon administration in the beginning of the presidency says that like within the presidency, South Korea will actually recover or they will receive the wartime Opcon. But in the case of the US, I think the security situation is different. In the past, the relations between the US and China was good, that I can say, but now both countries are having a rivalry situation. So this situation may affect the future of the CFC, including the wartime Opcon transfer. So the US political situation can play a very important role. So in 2 to 4 years later, I think the CFC, the future of the CFC will be dependent on whether or not a wartime Opcon transfer will be done. And the second, the situation of the East Asian countries. And at the third one is the situation of the US politics. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And last but not least, Mr. Bruce Klingner.
Great, thanks. I'd like to make 4 points. Looking to the future of CFC, one obviously is the biggest issue is Opcon transition. So not only fulfilling the actual requirements, but then dealing with a lot of incorrect perceptions in both South Korea and the United States. Second, I think we have to do things to address the potential South Korean concerns about an unzipping of the alliance once we switch chairs on the commander and the deputy commander. And also a lot of increasing questions about the viability of the U.S. as an ally. So, that has been a result of the, in my view, exorbitant demands by the U.S. For special measures agreement negotiations, the threats to reduce our forces if we don't get sufficient money. But also even before that, as North Korea was increasingly developing the capability to attack the United States, the homeland with nuclear weapons, I increasingly heard in Seoul and Tokyo, like, would you really sacrifice San Francisco for Seoul or Toledo for Tokyo? And we'd had to try to reassure them, yes, we have extended deterrence guarantee, we have a treaty guarantee, et cetera. But I think that may increasingly be an issue as we get closer to actual transition. The third issue would be delineating the relationship between Combined Forces Command and UNC. And I think a lot of things that KDVA has done is try to explain that. So, it was easy when the US commander wore all three hats. He just sort of had to choose which stationary he issued his orders on. But when the South Koreans assumes CFC command, the relationship between CFC and UNC becomes a bit more perhaps uncertain and confusing. So would a South Korean CFC commander interact with and delineate responsibilities with UNC, including non-US sending forces? Would the South Korean CFC commander command non-US forces on the peninsula? Who controls UN naval forces beyond 12 nautical miles from the shores, et cetera? So there are a number of things that I think are more confusing or at least need to be delineated once the transition occurs or before. Fourth and finally would be defining the future of the alliance. So certainly North Korea is the wolf closest to the sled. We want to focus on that. It's going to continue to be the predominant threat. But we also need to look over the horizon beyond the Korean Peninsula, as Korea has done for many years. But I think as South Korea continues to improve its military capabilities, Seoul would be and should be called upon to assume greater responsibility, particularly in the region. So South China Sea areas where South Korea is reliant on sea lines of communication for its oil deliveries and other economic activities. So it's in South Korea's interest to have free and open sea lines of communication. So I think the US has been asking for South Korea to do more in the South China Sea. So, as we not only respond to North Korea, but looking to the China threat as well as other threats.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let us move to some of the audience questions for our remaining 10 or 12 minutes. And first off, one question from the audience. how to best provide analysis to policymakers on Opcon transition. This, I think, important, especially as we all understand with the transition to a new administration in Washington. General Brooks, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's really important that those who help to shape policy and to shape ideas about the alliance have a clarity of their own that they then communicate to others. It shouldn't be assumed that the clarity is complete within the halls of government. And I don't say that to be facetious or negative, it's simply true. So these matters we've talked about on equating Opcon transition to sovereignty or Opcon transition to the Pershing rule and subordination, as Bruce talked about, those are incorrect and they're held in government. So there's a need for those to look at it objectively outside of government to help inform the dialogue within government on exactly what it is and what it is not. And I believe that's the role to be played. There's also a need to communicate publicly in writings, in webinars like this, what the differences are, what the frictions are, the hindrances, and what the needs are. And so today we hope that that has gone a step toward that direction.
Ashton?
Yeah, so there's a counterfactual question here, which I think might be interesting for us to explore, which is why the ROK-U.S. alliance isn't considering having two separate commands connected with a liaison office and an MC, a structure that we've had before. Perhaps I can field this question to General Lim Ho-young.
His mic is off. I think everything starts from our history. So the genesis of a US-Korea alliance is the Korean War. Because of the Korean War, the US-Korea alliance started, and after UNC, and so for more than 5 decades, we were fighting against this common enemy. So that is why that system has been continued. So this is the world's strongest alliance. This is the commanding structure, most strong commanding structure. It's not just like a US-Japan alliance. It's not each individual force has individual. This is the single structure. And so both countries have been fighting against the common enemy. So this has been proven through the war, and also for 7 decades, there are numerous exercises, and we overcame so many crises. And this is the fully trained commands. So this is unprecedented in the US, and you cannot see this CFC. And I think this is the most basic aspect of US ROK alliance. This is sort of like a new government, and that is what I can say.
Thank you, General. I saw a finger from Mr. Bruce Klingner.
Yeah, actually, the original Opcon transition plan was to have 2 separate parallel commands, Korea Command, CORECOM. And I think many of us thought it was a bad idea. It'd be like having 2 quarterbacks on the football field. So obviously, even though the 2 commands would be coordinating and all that, it seemed by having 2 commanders, you have a greater danger of dropping the ball. Or if one commander said, well, we want to use the Air Force to attack North Korean forces right along the forward edge of the battlefield area, and the U.S. commander might say, well, no, we don't do tank plinking. We go downtown to the Pyongyang. We sever the head from the body. Colonel John Boyd's 5 concentric circle, et cetera. And it's like, well, then how do you have a coherent war plan if you have perhaps 2 commanders arguing for 2 different strategies? So I think it's better to keep a combined forces command and then just switch the first chair violin and second chair violin of the commander and the deputy commander.
Thank you. This is a question for General Brooks. Given the talent and by way of talent and personnel management, how, given the exchange back and forth by those who have studied or worked in one another's countries, how do we maximize our soldiers' capabilities and understanding of our alliance partner based on that very practical experience through education or through service?
Those who have studied in the opposite country are very, very valuable because they have a cultural awareness, they tend to have a linguistic ability, and they have a firsthand experience in someone else's military. So there's great value in that. So whether it's foreign area officers from the United States or those selected under military education and training programs coming from the Republic of Korea to the United States, they're very valuable. And because we have been together as allies for so long, there are many of them, okay, generations of them now, some of whom are in very senior positions. And so I think that's beneficial and is an example of what it is that knits the Korea-US alliance together so tightly. It's not enough though, okay, so that is a nucleus, but not enough to form a full body. The rest of the organization then has to be informed by those who have the firsthand experience, and they must engage with each other in the culture that is evident in each country. There's so much overlap between the two militaries. I often tell people it's a shared DNA without doubt, whether it's a doctrine or the approach to warfighting, even the uniforms that are worn, the military traditions that come with it, they are very much two arms on the same body. At the same time, they're two different arms. And as a result, each side needs to gain deeper experience and understanding with the culture of the other. And when that occurs, there can be firsthand knowledge of ability, there's trust, and there's a reduction of misunderstanding when culture impacts decisions. And that happens. How decisions are made, what level they go to, how much decentralization or centralization there might be. What happens when you call somebody out? Does it cause a loss of face or is it an increase of clarity? These are two different things culturally and they matter. So the closer we can get the two sides together, living with each other in a combined fashion, like the CFC headquarters is, the better. And I think that's all to the good within the alliance, and using those who have had the first-hand experience is the start.
Ashton?
So I think we'll perhaps have time for one more question. And there is a question about whether Opcon transfer will result in the reduction of US troops and forces. And perhaps Mr. Klingner, you can comment on this, and General Brooks, perhaps a short comment also would be great. Thank you.
Well, Presidents Bush and Obama pledged to maintain a floor of 28,500 American forces in the peninsula. So that hasn't changed, although there have been sort of recent threats to do so. There's nothing in the Opcon transition which has a characteristic of reducing US forces. As long as the North Korean threat remains at the current level, there'd be no need to, and it would, in my view, would be dangerous to reduce US forces before the threat for which they are deployed against has been reduced itself. So I don't see any reason to reduce, nor any indication that there's a decision to reduce US forces because of Opcon transition.
And I agree with the thinking on that. I don't see the need right now. However, I do believe that it's always important to assess the situation and determine what the operational need is. I have great confidence in the capabilities of the South Korean armed forces, and as they are significantly larger in number than the US forces on the peninsula on a given day. And that will be the case even after the demographic impacts of a smaller population emerge. It will still be the primary force. So what is needed relative to the primary threat, North Korea? Right now, the threat is actually rising. The conventional threat is rising. There might need to be a discussion about an increase of certain capabilities on the Korean Peninsula as a result. If we have a condition that is moving toward peace, maybe not. There may be confidence building measures that are associated with the force composition that really realistically ought to be considered. So as we look at the emerging environment, that should determine what the force presence should look like and the composition of the force that is present nevertheless. Thanks.
Thank you,
Sorry,
General
Steve,
Brooks.
I just wanted to,
Oh, go ahead, Ashton.
General Leem also wanted to add in a comment, and I do apologize. It's also very relevant for the Korean perspective. So General Leem Ho-young, please, could you share with us your thoughts? Thank you.
사실 한국의 많은
As a
국민들은
matter of fact, many Koreans in Korea, whenever they hear about that U.S. Force reduction, they are very sensitive about this issue. So it's not just that Korean Peninsula's military issue, but this is because there will be a huge influence on the socio-economic aspect. So leaving the U.S. force, leaving Korea, and this is directly related to survival of Korea, South Korea. So when you consider all these things, this decision has to be made very prudently, and also as a symbol of Korea-U.S. alliance. So how many military force is being maintained in Korea, that can be a barometer. So when we talk about the reducing U.S. force, it's not just the military related questions. This is a very complicated, critical issue. So many Koreans are very sensitive about this particular issue. So I wanted to add that.
General Leem, General Brooks, Mr. Klingner, thank you.
Thank you. Great pleasure.
Steve Lee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Your mic is on, Connolly.
We thank General Abrams very much for his opening remarks, and thanks to our panelists, great panelists, General Brooks, General Leem, and Mr. Klingner, and our co-moderators, Dr. Noerper and Dr. Cho. Thank you all for making this a unique and valuable webinar. For our next event, KDVA and CUSIF will present a very special webinar about the life and legacy of General Paek Sun-yup on his 100th birthday on November 23rd, through the stories and memories of his oldest daughter, Miss Nami Park. You will hear stories that are not in any history books, documentaries, or museums. This Zoom webinar in the U.S. Eastern Time Zone will be on Sunday night, November 22nd at 7 p.m. And in Korea, it will be on Monday morning, November 23rd at 9 a.m. So please join us. Please consider joining KDVA to add your voice to supporting the ROK-U.S. Alliance. KDVA and CUSIF would very much appreciate it. And of course, all donations are welcome. So thank you again very much as we work together for the ROK-U.S. Alliance and for our wonderful veterans. Thank you again, everybody.
같이 갑시다.